The holographic memo hung in the air above James Rur's desk, a constellation of cold, blue light against the drab gray of his office wall. It wasn't just a message, it was a verdict. He stared at the softly pulsing glyphs, the formal Synindaran script translated neatly below into brutally efficient Earth standard, and felt the familiar, comfortable ground of his life give way beneath him. Assignment: Earth Representative, Synindaran Royal Wedding. Departure: 0600 hours. Station 7. 8 years. For 8 years, he had built a career, a life, on being precisely where he was. In a small, quiet office, negotiating mineral rights with asteroid colonies. His world was one of spreadsheets, of tungsten price fluctuations, of arguments over extraction quotas that were, in the grand, silent scheme of the universe, utterly meaningless. It was safe. It was boring. It was a life designed specifically to avoid moments like this. "This is a mistake," he whispered to the empty room. The hologram shimmered, indifferent. "It has to be." He was a backroom diplomat, a bureaucrat of the void. He wasn't crafted for galactic stages. He didn't own the right kind of shoes for representing his entire species. The sheer, staggering weight of the responsibility felt like a physical pressure on his chest. He was James Rur, who once got locked out of his own apartment in his socks, not Ambassador Rur, who would rub shoulders with aristocrats who predated written language. With a sigh that came from the very marrow of his bones, he swiped the air, pulling up the cultural briefing files attached to the assignment. Each new page was a fresh layer of dread. The Synindarans, it appeared, constructed their palaces from living crystal that resonated with emotional states. Their wedding ceremonies were a 6-hour symphony of light, sound, and ritual. 6 hours. He got fidgety during 20-minute budget meetings. And the guest list. It read like a xenobiologist's fever dream. Species from spiral arms he couldn't pronounce, beings of pure energy, corporeal entities with physiologies that defied every law of biology he'd learned in school. He was a man who appreciated a good, solid table of data. The universe, it seemed, was determined to present him with a gallery of impossibilities. Then he found the security addendum. The words were dry, bureaucratic, but they sent a primal chill down his spine. The sanguish nobility will be in attendance. Exercise extreme caution. Do not accept invitations to private chambers. Do not consume beverages offered directly by sanguis individuals. Maintain a minimum distance of 3 meters when possible. The sanguis. Everyone in the diplomatic corps had heard the whispers. Vampires was the crude, human term, but it stuck because it was terrifyingly apt. A species that had mastered biological immortality while humanity was still learning to forge bronze. They moved through the currents of galactic politics like sharks through dark water, ancient, powerful, and inscrutable. The file provided a grainy, long-range photo. Lady Morvana of House Knox, the caption read. The image showed a pale, elegant face, sharp and beautiful as a shard of ice, framed by hair as black as the void between stars. But it was the eyes that held him. Even in the poor resolution, they glowed with a crimson light, and held an expression of such profound, aristocratic boredom that it seemed to suck the warmth from the room. She looked like someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations and had found them all lacking. "Fantastic," James muttered, slumping back in his chair. The leather creaked a protest. "Don't get eaten by space vampires. They should put that on the recruitment posters." The 3 days that followed were a blur of low-grade panic, masquerading as professional diligence. He stood in his bathroom, facing his own wide-eyed reflection in the mirror, trying to wrap his tongue around the melodic, clicking phonemes of the Synindaran formal greeting. "Kathera Vensha, Uldor and Kai." His tongue felt like a foreign object in his mouth. The phrase was supposed to mean, "May your resonance find harmony in this joyous confluence." It came out sounding like a malfunctioning food processor. He drowned in data pads, trying to memorize the impossibly complex web of noble houses and political alliances. The Jacksons considered a direct gaze a declaration of war, while the Centauri would interpret averted eyes as a sign of deceit. He learned that the methane-breathing Galathea found the oxygen-rich atmosphere of the wedding hall mildly flammable and would be encased in environmentally controlled suits with 17 redundant safety systems. He learned, and he forgot, and he learned again, his mind a sieve through which crucial diplomatic protocols poured like water. The night before his departure, the door chime to his apartment sang its 2-note song. He found Lena Martinez standing there, holding a bottle of amber liquid that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her smile was a familiar, welcome anchor in the choppy seas of his anxiety. "You look terrible," she announced cheerfully, stepping past him and navigating the labyrinth of data pads and discarded clothing that littered his floor. "I feel terrible," he confessed, collapsing onto the couch beside her. "Do you know they expect me to give a formal toast? In Synindaran, I can barely say hello without causing a diplomatic incident." Martinez poured 2 generous glasses of whiskey, the rich, peaty scent filling the room. "Just smile. Don't start any wars, and for God's sake, don't try any of your jokes." That's literally the entire job description. "That's not comforting, Lena. You asked me why they chose you instead of Ambassador Chen or Director Singh. This is why." She took a sip, her dark eyes serious for a moment. "This is a box-checking exercise, James. You show up. You look diplomatic in your suit. You come home. Earth sends a representative. The Synindarans feel respected. The galaxy keeps spinning. You're not there to negotiate peace treaties. You're there to exist, politely, for a few hours." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to clutch that simple, cynical logic to his chest like a shield. But Martinez hadn't read the files. She hadn't seen the warnings about species whose touch could trigger anaphylactic shock, or the specific, chilling details about the sanguis and their unsettling habit of treating other species as amusing curiosities at best, and prey at worst. He slept fitfully that night, his dreams a chaotic montage of crystalline palaces, unpronounceable names, and eyes the color of fresh blood. The transport to Synindra Prime was a cramped, utilitarian vessel that smelled of recycled air and antiseptic. The journey through hyperspace took 18 hours, a stretch of time that felt both infinite and terrifyingly brief. James sat strapped in his seat, his data pad glowing in the dim cabin light, reviewing his notes until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. He practiced his toast under his breath, the alien syllables feeling like stones in his mouth. The other passengers, a Centauri trade minister with iridescent feathers and a calm, unreadable demeanor, and a trio of insectoid Thrumians who communicated through a series of complex clicks and gestures, ignored him completely. Their indifference was a palpable thing, a reminder of his own insignificance in the vast tapestry of galactic society. He was a speck, a momentary blip, and the weight of representing 7 billion other specks was crushing. When the ship finally shuddered out of hyperspace, the viewport filled with the vision of Synindaran Prime, and James forgot how to breathe. The planet was a jewel. Its surface was encrusted with vast, crystalline structures that caught the light of its twin suns and fractured it into a symphony of impossible colors. Cities sprawled across continents in intricate, geometric patterns that spoke of a mathematics beyond human comprehension. It wasn't just a world, it was a work of art, a testament to millennia of civilization. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "The Synindarans have been building for 12,000 years. That palace complex you're heading to. They broke ground on it when your ancestors were still figuring out agriculture." "No pressure," James whispered to the cold glass of the viewport. "No pressure at all." The descent was a slow, majestic immersion into wonder. The shuttle wove through layers of atmospheric traffic, a dance of elegant, organic-looking vessels that made Earth's busiest spaceports seem clumsy and primitive. They finally settled on a landing platform that jutted from the side of a crystalline mountain like a silver leaf. The palace itself soared above them, a frozen waterfall of light, a structure that seemed less built and more grown. James gathered his belongings, a hanging bag with his formal wear, his diplomatic credentials, and 3 backup copies of his toast, because in this place, paranoia felt like the height of reason, and stepped out into the air of an alien world. It smelled of ozone and something sweet and unfamiliar, like jasmine and starlight. Beneath that, there was something else, a faint, electric tang that made the tiny hairs on his arms stand on end. His hindbrain, the ancient, reptilian part of him, whispered that he was very, very far from home. A Synindaran attendant glided toward him. Their form was vaguely humanoid, but covered in fine, opalescent scales that shifted through a mesmerizing spectrum of colors with their every movement. Their voice was like wind chimes. "Delegate Rur, welcome. The ceremony begins in 2 hours. Your quarters are prepared." 2 hours. He followed the attendant into the heart of the living palace. The corridors were not static. They seemed to breathe. Light pulsed within the walls, flowing in gentle waves that responded to the ebb and flow of the crowds. He could feel a faint, pleasant hum through the soles of his new, and already uncomfortable, shoes. It was the most beautiful, most terrifying place he had ever been. His quarters were a small, serene alcove with a wall that was a single, curved sheet of crystal, offering a breathtaking view of the planet's rings arcing across a lavender sky. He changed into his formal wear, the dark Earth-style suit feeling absurdly crude and funereal against the vibrant, living artistry of his surroundings. He checked his reflection. He looked like an accountant who had wandered into a symphony. The ceremonial hall stole what little breath he had left. The scale was incomprehensible. The ceiling arched so high overhead it might as well have been a sky, yet the acoustics were so perfect he could hear the rustle of a centaur's feathers from 100 meters away. Pillars of living crystal grew from the floor like ancient trees, their surfaces rippling with colors that had no name in any human language. Bioluminescent flowers clustered everywhere, their petals pulsing with a soft, internal light that shifted from blue to violet to a shade that seemed to exist just beyond the edge of his perception. He found his seat, a single, solitary chair in a section marked for the human delegation. The message of Earth's importance in the galactic community, measured in furniture, was painfully clear. "At least I don't have to share armrests," he murmured to himself, then felt a flush of embarrassment for talking to an empty chair. The other guests began to filter in, and James's attempt at professional discretion evaporated. He stared, openly and unapologetically. Beings of light and shadow, of crystal and gas and shimmering energy, filled the hall. A group of Galathi floated past in their containment suits, their gaseous forms swirling like miniature nebulae within the glowing spheres. A being that appeared to be made of interconnected, shifting geometric crystals took a seat nearby, its movement producing a sound like 1,000 tiny wind chimes. A delegation of silver-furred lumen, their voices a harmonious, singing language, engaged in a spirited debate. Then the music began. It was not something one heard with just the ears. It was a vibration that traveled up through the floor, resonating in his bones. A deep, thrumming bass that made his sternum hum, counterpointed by high, crystalline notes that he felt in his teeth. There were harmonics woven through it, frequencies that shouldn't have been possible, that made the air shimmer and his vision soften at the edges. It was beauty and physics, intertwined. It was the sound of the universe itself, singing. Is this what a religious experience feels like? He wondered, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a pang of sorrow for all the generations of his ancestors who had lived and died without ever knowing such a thing could exist. The wedding party entered through an archway that coalesced from the very air, a doorway of light that hadn't been there a moment before. The Synindaran couple moved with a fluid, impossible grace, their crystalline garments reflecting and amplifying the music into cascades of colored light. Their attendants carried harmonic resonators, instruments that looked like harps made from solidified sound. The ceremony itself was a poem written in light and vibration. The couple exchanged vows in tones that caused the bioluminescent flowers to brighten in sympathetic response. Their words sent ripples of color cascading through the pillars and walls. When they finally pressed their foreheads together in the traditional bonding gesture, the entire palace seemed to release a single, pure note of joy, a sound so profound and heartfelt that James felt tears, unbidden and unauthorized, slide down his cheeks. He wiped them away hastily, hoping no one had witnessed the human delegate getting emotional. He did his best to follow along. He stood when others stood. When a complex, multi-jointed gesture was called for. He offered a simple, respectful bow instead, which a nearby Synindaran seemed to appreciate, reaching out to touch his shoulder. The contact sent a warm, static-like tingle through his jacket. 3 hours in, the ceremony reached its zenith. The couple ascended a platform that rose from the floor, and every being in the hall was invited to contribute to a collective harmony. The Galathea produced deep, subsonic hums that vibrated through the floor. The crystalline being created a cascade of notes like shattering glass that somehow conveyed pure elation. The lumens sang their multi-part harmonies. James, utterly lost but deeply moved, simply hummed along, his small, human voice a single thread swallowed by the magnificent, galactic tapestry of sound. When it ended, the silence was a physical presence, heavy and sacred. As the guests began to move toward the reception, James felt the nervous flutter in his stomach return, now amplified by a strange, wistful melancholy. The reception hall was, if possible, even more grand. Tables groaned with food and drink from 100 worlds. In alcoves, self-playing instruments created pockets of ethereal music. And at the center, a vast dance floor where beings of every conceivable physiology moved together in a display of coordination that suggested a universal rhythm underlying all of creation. James made a beeline for the refreshment tables, his appetite suddenly fierce. The selection was bewildering. Glowing liquids in crystalline decanters, fruits that cycled through colors, things that might have been meat or might have been musical vegetables. He selected a vaguely purple liquid that had the viscosity of wine and poured a cautious glass. He retreated to a quiet corner, his preferred habitat, and took a sip. It tasted like grapes that had been fermented in a nebula and filtered through quantum uncertainty. Not unpleasant, but definitely not the California Cabernet he was hoping for. He stood there for what felt like an hour, nursing his alien wine, watching the galactic elite mingle with an ease he could only envy. He practiced his expression of polite interest, hoping it looked more like diplomatic contemplation than sheer social terror. And then he felt it. It was a prickle at the nape of his neck, a sudden, chilling certainty of being watched. Not the casual, curious glances he'd received all evening, but a focused, intense attention that made the air around him grow still. It was a primal sensation, the feeling a mouse must get when it senses the shadow of the hawk. He turned slowly, and found himself looking into the crimson eyes of Lady Morvana of House Knox. She was moving through the crowd, and the crowd parted for her. It wasn't a panicked scattering, but a graceful, instinctive yielding, the way water yields to a ship's hull. She was taller than he had imagined, her form swathed in a gown that seemed woven from shadows and captured starlight, clinging and flowing in a way that defied physics. Her skin was pale as moonglow, a stark contrast to the waterfall of night-black hair that cascaded over her shoulders. And her eyes, they were ancient. They held the cold, patient light of distant stars, and they were fixed directly on him. His grip tightened on his glass. The briefing photo had been a pale imitation, a charcoal sketch compared to this oil painting of lethal elegance. Every warning, every line of bolded text in the security addendum, screamed in his mind. She stopped precisely 3 feet away, respecting the distance his briefing had so strongly recommended. The fact that she knew the recommendation, and chose to adhere to it, was somehow more terrifying than if she had ignored it. "You are the human delegate," she said. Her voice was a low contralto, each word perfectly enunciated, shaped by centuries of refinement. His translator remained silent. She was speaking nearly perfect Earth standard, her accent a faint, exotic melody beneath the words. "James Rur," he managed, proud that his voice only wavered slightly. "Lady Morvana, if I'm not mistaken." "You are not." Her head tilted a fraction, a gesture of curiosity that was both avian and deeply intelligent. "You have been standing alone in this corner for the past 47 minutes. In Synindaran culture, that is considered unfortunate. A sign of loneliness." James's mind raced. He glanced around the teeming hall. "Just observing," he said, a little too quickly. "Learning the customs. It's very diplomatic of me. How convenient that diplomacy and social anxiety look so identical from a distance." He blinked. Had a 600-year-old vampire just made a joke at his expense? The faint, almost imperceptible quirk at the corner of her lips suggested she had. "I prefer to think of it as strategic positioning," James countered, finding a sliver of his nerve. "This corner has excellent sightlines and easy access to refreshments. Tactically sound. And yet you have been nursing the same glass of Andromedan wine for 47 minutes, she noted, her crimson gaze flicking to his drink. "Either you are an extremely slow drinker, or you are unsure if it is actually wine. Can't it be both?" This time, the smile was unmistakable. It was brief, a flash of white in the pale landscape of her face, but it was real. It transformed her, softening the ancient severity, revealing a glimpse of the person beneath the predator. "Tell me, James Rur," she said, and his name in her mouth sounded like a foreign, beautiful word. "Do humans dance at weddings?" Every alarm in his head blared to life. Pheromones. Biological compatibility. Incident potential. The words from the briefing flashed like neon signs. "We do," he admitted cautiously. "Though I'm not sure I know any dances that would be appropriate here. I'm more of a shuffle awkwardly near the punch bowl specialist." "I see." She regarded him, and the curiosity in her eyes seemed genuine. "And if someone were to offer instruction, would human pride prevent you from accepting?" "My pride died somewhere around hour 2 of the ceremony when I accidentally hummed in the wrong key during the harmonic blessing. At this point, I'm running on survival instinct and possibly wine." Her laugh was a low, melodic sound that seemed to surprise even her. It was utterly unguarded. Several beings nearby turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of shock and fascination. "How refreshingly honest. Most diplomats I encounter are too busy calculating political advantage to admit vulnerability." "That's because most diplomats are better at their jobs than I am," James said. "I normally negotiate mineral rights with asteroids. The asteroids don't care if I'm charming." She extended a hand. It was pale and elegant, the fingers long and graceful. His brain unhelpfully supplied a torrent of information about Sangui's physiology, body temperature, and tensile strength. Every instinct told him to refuse. But he looked at her eyes. In their crimson depths, beneath the layers of ancient power and predatory grace, he saw something else. A flicker of the same isolation he had been feeling all evening. The loneliness of a perpetual outsider. "Dance with me, James Rur," she said. It was not a command, not quite a request. It was an invitation, layered with unspoken meaning. Consider it a cultural exchange. You learn Synindaran formal dance. I learn whether humans are as rigid as their diplomatic briefings suggest. "You've read our briefings?" he asked, startled. "I've read briefings about your briefings. House Knox has information brokers who specialize in knowing what everyone else knows." Her hand remained extended, steady and patient. "The document your superiors gave you suggested maintaining a 3-meter distance from my kind. It also suggested never accepting drinks from us, never entering private chambers, and treating us as fundamentally dangerous." "To be fair," James said slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, "you did just admit to being 600 years old and politically connected enough to have spies reading our classified files." "True. I am dangerous." Her crimson eyes met his, holding his gaze with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "But dangerous does not mean cruel. And tonight, I am simply asking for a dance with someone who might see me as a person, rather than a threat assessment." He looked at her hand. He looked at the dance floor, a swirling galaxy of life and motion. He looked back at her eyes, and saw the mask of power for what it was, a shield, worn smooth by centuries of fear and deference. His diplomatic training screamed in protest. His survival instinct suggested flight. His hand reached out anyway. Her fingers closed around his. They were cool, but not unpleasantly so. They were firm, yet gentle. And in that moment, as their skin made contact, James felt a shift in the universe, a subtle realignment of his own personal gravity. She led him onto the floor, and he was acutely aware that every being in the hall was now watching the human diplomat dance with a Sangui's noble. He could feel the weight of their gazes, the silent, collective intake of breath. "Try not to look like you are walking to your execution," she murmured, her voice for his ears only. She positioned his hands with a surprising gentleness, one on the small of her back, which felt solid and real beneath the shadowy fabric of her gown, the other holding hers. The Synindaran informal waltz is simpler than it looks. 3 steps, turn, 3 steps, turn. Let the music guide you. The music that's currently making my kidneys vibrate. That is the one. Her lips quirked. Focus on the underlying rhythm, not the harmonic overtones. Unless you wish to dance in 4 dimensions, in which case we will need a specialist. The music shifted, coalescing into a slower, more intimate tempo. He could actually identify a beat now, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to emanate from the floor itself. Morgan began to move, and he tried to follow, immediately stepping on her foot. "Sorry," he winced. "I should have warned you. I'm the reason my high school banned humans from prom. That seems excessive. There was an incident with a punch bowl and the principal's wife. In my defense, someone had spiked it with something that reacted poorly with my allergy medication. How wonderfully chaotic. She guided him through another sequence, her hands applying light, precise pressure to correct his posture. Try again. 3 steps. Left, right, left. Then turn. He concentrated, managing the 3 steps without catastrophe before the turn sent him off balance. She steadied him with effortless strength, a reminder of the power contained within her slender frame. Better, she said. You are thinking too much. Dance is about trust, not calculation. Trust is difficult when I'm approximately 5 dance lessons away from competent, and you're, he caught himself, an apex predator in elegant clothing. Go ahead, James Rur, she said, a hint of dry amusement in her voice. I have heard every vampire joke humanity has invented since you discovered radio. I was going to say, graceful, James said, finding his rhythm for a moment. But now I'm curious about the jokes. Most involve garlic, which is simply a human myth. We actually find it quite delicious in the right preparation. They turned together, smoother this time. Though, I will admit your species' obsession with wooden stakes has some historical basis. It's less about the wood and more about the general principle that impaling is bad for most carbon-based life forms. James laughed, the sound startling him. It was genuine. That seems universally applicable, one would think. Yet every few centuries, someone requires a reminder. Her expression softened, the ancient ice in her eyes thawing by a degree. You are doing well for someone who claimed to be terrible at this. I have excellent motivation not to embarrass myself in front of several hundred alien dignitaries. Is that all? Something flickered in her crimson eyes, amusement, mixed with what might have been a trace of disappointment. And here I thought my devastating charm was contributing. They moved through another sequence, and James realized with a start that he had stopped counting steps. His body had learned the language of the dance, following Morgan's lead through patterns that now felt almost natural. He was aware of the cool press of her hand in his, the whisper of her dress against his legs, the faint, clean scent she carried, like night-blooming flowers and cold, clear air. Can I ask you something? He ventured. That depends entirely on the question. Why me? You could have asked any being here to dance. Why the awkward human hiding by the refreshment table? She was quiet for a long moment, guiding them through a turn that took them past a pair of centauri whose dance looked like a martial art, and 3 Galathi who waltzed in perfect, floating formation. Most beings treat me as if I am made of teeth and malice, she said finally, her voice low. They smile diplomatically while calculating escape routes. They agree with everything I say while wondering if I am reading their minds. She met his gaze, and the raw honesty there was disarming. You took my hand despite being terrified. That is either remarkable bravery or delightful stupidity. And either way, it is refreshing. For the record, I'm going with stupidity. Bravery implies I thought this through. Even better. Her smile this time reached her eyes, warming them to a deep garnet. I have lived through 6 human centuries, James. I have seen empires rise and collapse into dust. I have attended peace conferences that prevented wars and dinner parties that started them. I have been courted by princes and threatened by assassins, sometimes simultaneously. And through it all, everyone sees the monster first, and the person, never. The music swelled around them, a wave of sound and feeling, and James found himself pulling her slightly closer, a subconscious response to the vulnerability in her words. "I don't think you're a monster," he said softly. "You barely know me. True. For all I know, you collect human skulls as decorative centerpieces." "Only 3, she said, her face a perfect mask of seriousness. "And they were gifts from a Necroyan ambassador who profoundly misunderstood human mortuary customs. They are in storage, very awkward to display." James missed a step, laughing, and she caught him effortlessly, spinning them both in a move that sent a thrill through him. When they steadied, they had drifted to a quieter section of the floor, the other dancers a respectful, swirling periphery. "You're staring," she observed, her voice a whisper. "I apologize. It's just, you're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" "Someone terrifying. Someone who'd treat me like an amusing curiosity at best." He hesitated, gathering his courage. "Not someone who'd be patient with my terrible dancing and make jokes about skull collections." "I am terrifying, James," she said, her tone matter of fact. "I could break you without effort. My political influence spans sectors. My house has ended bloodlines for lesser insults than some I have overlooked tonight." She tilted her head, those ancient eyes searching his soul. "But terrifying does not mean empty. And tonight, I am simply enjoying a dance with someone who forgot to be afraid long enough to see me." The music shifted again, slowing to a final, intimate cadence. They moved together now in perfect synchronization, no longer diplomat and predator, student and teacher, but simply 2 beings, adrift in a sea of music and light. James was no longer thinking of steps or protocols or reports. He was only aware of the cool, solid reality of her in his arms, the faint scent of her, the profound, unexpected comfort of being truly seen. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "For the dance. For being patient." "The pleasure," she replied, and he could feel the truth of it in the way her hand rested in his, "has been entirely mine." The final note hung in the air, a crystalline chime that resonated deep in his chest. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved. They stood at the center of the alien galaxy, hands still connected, while the music transitioned to something new around them. The spell was broken, but its echo remained, vibrating in the space between them. Morgan was the first to withdraw, her movements once again becoming those of the poised aristocrat. The mask, for a moment so beautifully lowered, was back in place. But her eyes, he saw, still held a trace of their earlier warmth. "I should let you return to your diplomatic observations," she said, though she made no immediate move to leave. "I have monopolized enough of your evening." "I wasn't doing anything important," James said, the words tumbling out. Mostly trying to identify which foods wouldn't kill me and wondering if the Galaxy find our atmosphere as weird as we find theirs. They find it flammable. Mostly, she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Their environmental suits have those 17 redundant systems to prevent unfortunate combustion incidents. There was a memorable event at a trade summit 2 decades ago. Someone's oxygen-based beverage ignited near a Galaxy's exhaust port. The resulting flash fire cleared the entire West Wing. Was anyone hurt? Only diplomatic relations with 3 neighboring sectors. The Galaxy thought it was hilarious. Everyone else, less so. She took a graceful step back, re-establishing a formal distance. You should try the crystallized fruits near the far table. They are from Synindra's southern continent. Safe for human consumption. Probably delicious. Possibly mildly hallucinogenic, but in an enjoyable way. That's quite an endorsement. I have been alive for 6 centuries, James. I have learned to appreciate experiences that blur the edges of reality. Her expression softened once more. That brief, precious glimpse of the person beneath the title. James Rur. There will be more diplomatic functions. More formal gatherings where species meet to pretend we understand each other, while actually just trying not to cause incidents. Sounds like my entire career. If you find yourself at another such event. She paused. And he saw it again. A flicker of uncertainty, a carefully controlled vulnerability. Save a dance for me. Before he could formulate a response. Something that wasn't a stammered agreement or a hopelessly romantic declaration. Morgan performed a slight, formal bow that was both respectful and final, then turned and glided away. The crowd parted for her once more, and within seconds, she was absorbed back into the tapestry of the reception, leaving James standing alone, the ghost of her cool touch still on his skin. Delegate Rur, a Synindaran attendant, was at his elbow, their scales shimmering with concerned hues of blue and green. Are you well? Your vital signs show elevated heart rate and irregular breathing patterns. I'm fine, James said, realizing he was indeed breathless. Just processing. The sanguis have that effect, the attendant said sympathetically. Would you like me to escort you to the refreshment area? Or perhaps the observation balcony? Many guests find the view calming after intense social interactions. He let himself be guided away, his eyes still scanning the crowd. He spotted Morgan across the hall, already engaged in deep conversation with a group of imposing, mineral-based lifeforms. She was the picture of aristocratic composure, every inch the powerful, ancient noble. There was no sign of the woman who had laughed about punch bowls and confessed to loneliness. But then, as if feeling the weight of his gaze, she glanced across the teeming hall. Her crimson eyes found his with unerring accuracy. And she smiled. Just a slight, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, just for him, before turning back to her. Conversation. His heart executed a complicated, joyful maneuver in his chest. The crystallized fruits, the attendant prompted, gesturing to a table laden with what looked like geometric gems. Lady Morvana recommended them. She did. James selected a fruit that shimmered with a blue-green light and placed it on his tongue. Flavor exploded. Sweet, tart, and something else entirely. A taste like listening to a beautiful piece of music or seeing a breathtaking color for the first time. "Oh," he breathed. "Oh, that's remarkable. They are cultivated in quantum-stabilized gardens," the attendant explained, pleased. "The fruits exist partially in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. It creates a flavor profile impossible to replicate elsewhere." James ate 3 more, deciding that if his life was going to veer into the fantastical, he might as well embrace it fully. The edges of the world didn't so much blur as become more vivid, more layered. The music gained new depths, the colors new brilliance. For the rest of the evening, he was a different man. The anxiety that had plagued him was gone, burned away in the crucible of that single dance. Other guests approached him, and he engaged them with a confidence that felt new and born of that connection. He delivered his toast, the Synindaran words flowing from his tongue with a passable fluency. He discussed trade routes with Centauri, deflected awkward questions about human biology from the Thrumians with a deft joke, and even shared a moment of what felt like mutual understanding with the crystalline being, communicating through simple gestures and shared appreciation of the music. And through it all, he remained aware of her. A constant, quiet hum of presence in the back of his mind, like a new star that had ignited in his personal sky. The journey back to Earth felt longer, the cramped cabin somehow smaller. The stars outside the viewport were the same, but he was not. He had gone to the wedding as James Rur, minor functionary. He was returning as, he didn't know who. But he was different. The Centauri trade minister nodded to him. "You made quite an impression, Delegate Rur. Dancing with Lady Morvana of House Knox. That will be remembered. Is that good or bad?" James asked. "That depends," the Centauri said, her feathered crest rippling, "entirely on what happens next." Back in his gray office on Earth, he filed his report with meticulous, bureaucratic care. The ceremony was culturally significant. Relations remained positive. No incidents to report. He wrote nothing of crimson eyes, of cool hands, of the way his chest still constricted when he remembered her smile. His supervisor approved it without comment. He returned to his spreadsheets, to the safe, predictable world of tungsten prices. But the numbers seemed hollow now, the arguments trivial. "You're being weird," Martinez said, finding him in the archives weeks later, surrounded by data pads on Sangui's history and culture. "Weirder than usual. What happened at that wedding?" "I danced with someone," he admitted. "You danced. Why does that require a security clearance level deep dive?" "Because she was Sanguish nobility who's been alive since before the Renaissance. And she asked me to save her a dance at the next diplomatic function. And I don't know if that was a polite formality, or actual interest, or some complex political maneuver I'm too naive to understand." Martinez stared at him. "James, it was one dance. She's probably forgotten your name. She knew I'd been standing alone for 47 minutes. She reads briefings about our briefings. She makes jokes about skull collections." He ran a hand through his hair. I think she might have been lonely, Lena. The 600-year-old vampire was lonely. Dangerous. Doesn't mean empty, he quoted quietly. Martinez studied him for a long moment, her usual cynicism replaced by a dawning understanding. You like her. I barely know her. That's not a denial. Before he could reply, his data pad chimed. An encrypted message. Unknown source. High priority. His heart leapt into his throat. He opened it. The text was minimal. Coordinates for a location on Proxima Station. A date, 3 weeks hence. Diplomatic summit. Trade relations and cultural exchange. And below, in an elegant, flowing script that was unmistakably penned by a human hand, or its exacting alien equivalent, were the words. I hope you will attend. The Proxima functions always have terrible wine, but occasionally, excellent company. He read it 3 times. The air left his lungs in a soft rush. What is it? Martinez leaned over. Then her eyes widened. Oh, you are completely screwed. That's helpful. Thank you. I mean emotionally screwed, not diplomatically. Though, possibly both. A slow grin spread across her face. You're going, obviously. Obviously, James said, his mind already racing, a strange, wild hope blooming in his chest where only anxiety had lived for so long. The 3 weeks were a whirlwind. He prepared for the Proxima summit with a fervor he'd never possessed, studying protocols, political landscapes, dance steps. He bought new shoes. The night before his departure, he stood on his balcony, watching the moon rise over the city. The familiar sights and sounds of Earth felt both comforting and strangely distant. His old life, the life of safe choices and spreadsheets, felt like a suit he had outgrown. He had spent 8 years building walls against the universe, against disappointment, against the fear of mattering. He had chosen a life where he was forgettable, where his decisions were small and his risks were smaller. But in a hall of living crystal, taking the hand of a woman who had seen empires turn to dust, he had felt more present, more alive, more truly himself than in all those years of careful calculation. In her ancient, lonely eyes, he had seen a reflection of his own hidden self, the part that yearned for connection beyond the boundaries of species and convention. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe he was a momentary diversion for an immortal being. Maybe the next dance would be awkward, the connection broken. But maybe, and the thought sent a shiver of pure, undiluted wonder through him, maybe it wasn't. Maybe ancient vampires did grow weary of being seen as monsters. Maybe immortality was, at its core, profoundly lonely. And maybe, just maybe, a single dance at an alien wedding could be the first note in a resonance that would span the light years. His data pad chimed with his departure confirmation. Transport in 16 hours. James Rur smiled at the stars, no longer cold, distant points of light, but beacons, each one a possibility. He turned and went inside to pack, his heart already racing toward a future he could never have imagined, already composing the words he would say when her crimson eyes found his across another crowded hall. The story was no longer about survival. It was about the next step. And he was ready to take it.